This layer tested much older than the story in most textbooks.
Yes, sir. Repeat layer. Okay, so.
If this date is right, it doesn't fit the story most of us learned in school about the first Americans.
For decades, American kids were taught a clean, simple timeline of how this continent was peopled.
Here is where most textbooks say the first Americans arrived, around 13,000 years ago.
We were given a neat picture, a single arrow, a single moment when the first Americans suddenly appear. For many of us, that story came with familiar images, small bands of hunters chasing giant animals across a blank, empty land.
It was neat, tidy, and maybe a little too comfortable.
But what happens when the ground itself starts telling a different story? If people were here long before that neat little arrow, the idea of first starts to look very different.
If all of this is older than the story I grew up with, what do we really mean when we ask, who was the first American?
When did the first Americans really arrive? And what does it even mean to call someone the first American? How far did they travel across this land? Do the echoes of their journey still resonate today?
This is the story of the first Americans, at least as far back as we can currently see.
From Ice Age migrations and coastal routes to living memory, we'll follow three threads into the deep past of the Americas.
So if this land has been home to humans for far longer than we once believed,
To find the first Americans, we have to start in a world that doesn't look like our own. With sea levels lower, an entire world of dry land, Beringia, linked Asia and the Americas.
Across this exposed land, herds moved with the seasons.
And people moved with them. Families, not just hunters, making lives in the cold.
These weren't just anonymous migrants. They were parents, children, and elders, building worlds at the edge of ice.
They told stories to make sense of this land, long before anyone else claimed to discover it.
For them, this wasn't a blank stage waiting for a famous arrival. It was already home.
scientists now think people arrived here in more than one wave, over thousands of years.
For a long time, most of this story focused on people crossing here and then marching straight into the continent's interior.
But at the height of the last ice age, huge ice sheets blocked many inland routes. That's why many researchers now look to the coastline for early routes into the Americas.
Small coastal camps like this may have lined shorelines that are now drowned by rising seas.
If people followed the coast, much of their earliest evidence may now lie under the waves.
So much of the early story could be out there, under 60 meters of water, where our ancestors once walked and camped.
As new sites are discovered and old ones redated, the timeline keeps reaching further back.
Far from the ice, later generations made new homes in forests, river valleys, and along inland lakes.
For their children, this land was not a destination at the end of a route. It was simply where life began.
When your people tell the story of where you come from,
how does that story begin?
Our stories don't start with crossing a bridge. They start with this land itself, with the places where we first emerged.
We come from the earth, from the mountains, from the water.
Science measures dates and distances. Origin stories describe relationships and beginnings.
They don't always use the same language. but they're often speaking about the same land, the same people, and the same deep past.
Long before any ship from across the ocean saw these shores, this hemisphere was already full of people and stories.
Yet in many classrooms, all of that deep time is squeezed into a few lines, a single picture at the edge of the page.
Draw how you imagine the first people in America. No right or wrong answers.
When you ask students to imagine the first Americans, their pictures look a lot more like origin stories than a single arrow on a map. But those visions rarely appear on official timelines, even when they're central to how communities understand themselves. The deep human past of this continent is often treated as a brief introduction to someone else's main story.
What happens when we treat the first tens of thousands of years as just a footnote?
For years, tools like this defined who counted as the first Americans. But that, too, is about to be questioned. For much of the 20th century, tools like this anchored the official story of the first Americans. They seemed to tell a clear story, a single wave of hunters arriving late in the Ice Age and spreading fast.
The standard model for decades was that the first Americans arrived around 13,000 years ago, bringing this distinctive toolkit with them.
Textbooks and documentaries alike turned that model into a simple picture. Late arriving hunters chasing giant animals across an empty land. Sites with this technology seem to appear almost everywhere at once, reinforcing the idea of a single, rapid spread.
If you grew up with this story, it probably looked something like this. One arrow, one wave, one moment when the first Americans arrived.
It's clean and satisfying. But in science, the neatest stories are often the ones that break first.
As archaeologists dug deeper, they began to find traces of people in layers below the so-called first Americans.
We have Clovis points up here, but down here, in this older layer, we're finding tools that predate them by thousands of years.
Layer after layer suggested that people were here long before the so-called first arrivals.
To test those deeper layers, scientists sent samples to labs like this, asking a simple, dangerous question. How old are they really?
This particular sample came back several thousand years older than the classic Clovis horizon. If the date holds,
paper after paper argued that humans reached the Americas much earlier than we had been taught.
Some archaeologists were persuaded, others were cautious or openly skeptical. Changing a big
site by site, the line marking first arrival started to move backwards, sometimes by thousands of years.
Desert sites, caves, ancient shorelines, all of them hinted at a much deeper human presence.
When you look at the probability ranges, they overlap in ways that make a simple single first arrival very hard to defend.
Extraordinary claims require really solid evidence. We need to be sure we are not just seeing noise in the data.
If these dates hold, they change everything.
Yes, but what if they don't?
Sometimes the real tension isn't just in the evidence itself, but in how hard it is to let go of a story we've told for generations.
This is the scientific timeline many people learn in school. How does it compare to the way your community tells its own beginnings?
Our stories don't begin with people crossing from somewhere else. They begin here, with this land.
We didn't arrive as strangers on this land. We emerged from it. The mountains, the rivers, the earth itself are part of our story.
The land is not just where we live. It's a living relative. It remembers us, and we remember it.
For many Indigenous communities, first is not about a route on a map. It's about a relationship with a place that has no beginning in numbers.
But in schools, they're often handed maps that show their ancestors arriving late to their own homeland.
On those maps, it always feels like we show up at the end, as if we're guests, not people who've always been from here.
In many books, the earliest people are a tiny sketch at the edge of the story.
while everything that comes after gets full-color chapters.
Think of it this way. We can draw two timelines for the first Americans.
One counts in years and radiocarbon dates. The other speaks in stories like, since time began, or we have always been here.
We date the carbon in the samples.
To estimate when people were here.
Our songs, our place names, and our...
What counts as evidence often depends on who gets to decide the rules. Who's at the table when we write the story of the past.
These timelines don't just live in textbooks. They echo through treaties, land deeds, and court decisions.
Different understandings of who was here first can shape everything from land claims to how seriously Indigenous nations are recognized in law. Across generations, communities have had to insist that their presence and their histories be taken seriously.
We don't need science to tell us we were here first. But sometimes it's good when the science finally catches up.
The story of the first Americans isn't just a line of data points. It's also about whose voices are believed when we tell the story at all. Arguments about who was here first don't just live in labs and classrooms. They spill into news feeds, comment sections, and politics.
I've taught this the old way for 20 years. Updating it is exciting and a little uncomfortable.
Each of these markers stands for a community that lived here thousands of years before any ship arrived. After all this, the question, who were the first Americans, isn't a closed case anymore, if it ever truly was. Every step we take here overlaps with lives that walked this ground tens of thousands of years ago.
The more we find, the harder it is to pretend there was just one simple story.
And the more we realize how long this place has been human. Whatever exact date you choose, by the time any ship from a distant shore sees this land, it is already deeply, unquestionably human.
And when wooden ships finally cross this ocean, they're not discovering an empty world. They're arriving in someone else's homeland.
Before we talk about first, we have to talk about how we measure time in the first place, how we turn bits of carbon and buried footprints into dates. Radiocarbon gives us a range, not a single magic number, which means there's always some uncertainty built into every date.
Machines like this help us estimate when a plant or animal stopped breathing, and when the people who used it were alive.
Here, a footprint steps into soft ground, then gets sealed by new layers. If we're lucky, those layers keep it safe.
High-resolution scans let scientists measure the depth, shape, and angle of each print, so they can tell whether it's really
In the lab, those layers become a timeline. Pollen, ash, and tiny fossils that help us anchor.
Every measurement comes with an error bar. Sometimes those ranges overlap so much that it's hard to say who was first in any precise sense. Sometimes the evidence was there all along, buried not in the ground, but in old notebooks. Good science doesn't just collect answers. It keeps track of the questions that are still wide open.
Between footprints, tools, sediments, and stories, we can sketch a deep human presence here. But we should be honest.
So maybe the better question isn't who was the first American, but what do we choose to do with the knowledge that people have been here for so long? The more time I spend here, the harder it is to imagine the first American.
This hemisphere has been lit by human lives for far longer than our modern city lights suggest.
For the children growing up here today, this isn't an origin myth or a debate. It's just home.
If people have been here this long, then we have to think thousands of years ahead when we walk on this land, or we won't be good ancestors for whoever comes next.
Once you stretch the story back, students start to ask different questions, not just about who arrived when, but about
when we put elders, scientists, and young people at the same table, the map stops being a puzzle about
Our steps layer on top of theirs, whether we acknowledge them or not.
Here's what we can say for now. None.
One, people have been in the Americas far longer than most of us were taught. Seen from here, every one of us is the descendant of travelers. On this planet,
maybe that question matters less than how we choose to live with the answers we have, and the people whose homelands we share.
Next, we follow the ships that claim to discover a world that was already full.